Good morning, everyone. If you haven't met me already, my name is Maeve. I was on this stage a bit yesterday. I'm very happy to be back. I'm a climate journalist from London, and I'm pleased to be hosting this next session, which is all about the good and the bad of lobbying. So public policy shapes our world, from environmental regulation to labor rights, corporate taxation. But the question is, who gets a seat at the table? And how does that translate into action? So today we'll try and distinguish between advocacy that drives positive change and influence that prioritizes special interests at the expense of public good. Before we start our panel discussion, please welcome to the stage for an incredible keynote, activist and founder of Force of Nature, Clover Hogan.
Hi, everyone. All right, let's see if we can get this working. Alrighty. How many of you here have played the board game Monopoly? Okay, good. Pretty much everyone. But for those of you who haven't played, the concept is pretty simple. Players move around a board, buying, trading, and developing properties until the person with the most money wins, or until your friends and family are no longer talking to one another. Now, I want you to imagine that you're playing a game of Monopoly, but in this scenario, there is one player who keeps changing the rules. They don't pay taxes, they hide money under the board, they even skip jail. And they argue that they're doing this, they're changing the rules for everyone's benefit. Because the more money and wealth and power they have, the better off everyone else will be. Now, if this actually happened in a game of Monopoly, I'm pretty sure there would be a revolt, right? People would refuse to keep playing, because what's the point when the game is rigged? Yet every day, we are playing a rigged game. Because while we have been sold on the idea of meritocracy, that if you work hard, you can climb the ladder and win big, the reality is our economic system concentrates wealth and resources in the hands of a few while distributing the costs, including pollution, ill health, job displacement, to the many. And every day, corporations work hard to change the rules of the game. One of the ways they do this is through corporate lobbying, influencing decision makers and policy. Now, I'm going to run us through a few quick examples. Some of you might remember Dieselgate from 2015, when Volkswagen used special software to cheat emissions tests in cars they had marketed as eco-friendly. Now, this was blatant fraud, but the reason why this deception went on for so long unchecked is because of their aggressive lobbying. They had pushed for laboratory tests, which could be easily manipulated, and lobbied against real-world emissions testing, which meant that standards were not implemented until after the scandal broke. Let's take another example. Purdue Pharma, the producer of opioid prescriptions. From 2004 to 2018, Purdue spent millions of dollars lobbying lawmakers in the US to soften policies that would have restricted the sale of their highly addictive drugs. These actions destroyed communities and have led to hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths that continue to this day. They even shaped laws that made it harder for patients to file lawsuits and seek compensation. All right, let's go for one more. In 2018, it was revealed that Facebook had allowed the personal data of millions of users to be harvested by the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica. This data was used to target voters in ways that affected political outcomes, including the 2016 presidential election. This was an explicit violation of privacy law. Yet again, it tracked with their lobbying record. influencing data privacy regulations to minimize users' rights to privacy and to maximize their commercial potential for advertisers. I could keep going. Amazon lobbying to evade taxes and receive massive subsidies. Google lobbying to influence antitrust investigations. But these are just the ones that make the headlines. In 2019, the European Green Deal was proposed to make Europe the first net zero continent by 2050. I'm sure you guys can guess the next bit. Automotive giants lobbied against emissions reductions, and fossil fuel companies lobbied against the phase-out of oil and gas subsidies. According to a report from Transparency International, these 7 fossil fuel companies, along with a network of over 50 organizations, held 1,000 meetings or more with European officials, backed by a budget of 64 million euros. Yet, this is pocket change for these corporations. Indeed, for the 2022 calendar year, these same companies awarded their investors payouts exceeding $119 billion US. Corporate lobbying is nothing new. And for years, it hasn't just infected national politics, but international negotiations like COP. In 1989, the Global Climate Coalition was created, a fossil fuel-backed lobbying group with the explicit purpose of blocking climate action. And they were especially influential in the late 90s, a critical time for climate legislation. Now, if we skip ahead a few decades to COP27 in Egypt, 636 fossil fuel lobbyists infiltrated the conference. The following year, at COP28 in Dubai, this number jumped to 2,456, more than any single country delegation. And both the president of COP28, as well as the president of COP29 the following year in Azerbaijan, were exposed for using the conferences to facilitate fossil fuel deals. Beyond back-channeling politicians, corporations also lobby indirectly. They do this through trade associations, think tanks, funding research, media campaigns, and as we've seen at COP, they also shape the narrative to promote phony solutions like clean fossil fuels, clean natural gas, or even carbon capture and storage. So, the question is, why is all of this allowed to continue? For one, in the US, corporate lobbying is considered a form of free speech, where businesses can advocate for their interests. And it is a little different here in the EU. It's seen as a legitimate way of ensuring that politicians listen to all stakeholders. Yet lawmakers are far more inclined to listen to powerful industries than they are civil society or NGOs. And that's not always because they're corrupt or even self-interested. Oftentimes, politicians are just as susceptible to the corporate propaganda machine as everyday people. They fall victim to arguments that corporations are essential for jobs creation and the tax revenue they generate, or that overregulation hurts business and, by extension, a country's competitiveness. Although, of course, there are the politicians who are genuinely in the pockets of corporations because they fund their campaigns. Take Trump. Oil interests gave his campaign $75 million US after he pledged to axe environmental regulations. And even in countries where there are much more stringent rules around campaign financing, there is still corruption. Take the most recent example of lobbying scandal in Europe, where it was uncovered that Huawei, the Chinese technology company, had provided bribes, including cash, luxury trips, and expensive gifts to members of the European Parliament in exchange for political support. There is also what's called the revolving door. where politicians leave public office to take high-paying jobs in the private sector, including in industries they once regulated. This can mean that former public servants use their insider knowledge as well as their connections to influence political outcomes for companies. The stats don't lie. In the US, 42% of representatives and 50% of senators go on to work as corporate lobbyists. Here in Europe, over 70% of Google and Meta's lobbyists have formerly worked for a government body. Now, figures like Trump are overt about the deals that they are making. But most corporate lobbying happens in the shadows. And I saw this firsthand a few years ago. I found myself in the boardroom of one of the world's biggest consumer goods companies. Now, I can't name them per se, but I can guarantee that you would find their logo amidst pretty much any beach cleanup around the world. Now, I was there as part of a sustainability council, and we were talking about the company's plastic waste. Now, their head of sustainability shared a commitment that she seemed really proud of, that all of their products would be recyclable by the end of the decade. Now, focusing on a product's recyclability without asking where it ends up is like ignoring an impending tsunami to fix a leaky tap. So, I pushed them on policy. I asked, what about the government? What about legislation against plastic pollution that would force the entire industry to move? And in response to this, their head of lobbying piped up. She said, well, we did just prevent legislation from passing that would have phased out the use of disposable plastics in one of our product ranges. Frankly, it was far too radical and hadn't been thought through properly. It's just not the kind of change this industry is ready for, at least for another few years. I was stunned silent by this blatant admission. But it shouldn't have come as any great surprise. A 2023 study found that 58% of the world's biggest corporations have put forward climate commitments that are in direct opposition to their own lobbying. This Sustainability Council echoed so many conversations I've had with big business. There was the leader at a consulting firm who told me, I don't think we should have to do anything else. We've done what can reasonably be expected without hurting the business's competitiveness. And there was the leader at a fast fashion company. We're a for-profit global company in the consumer space. Our core business and associated business model are fundamentally at odds with sustainability. Now, the thing is, they're not wrong. Because no matter how many good people there are within a corporation, people who genuinely care about climate change, corporations will only prioritize sustainability and social impact to the extent that it does not hurt their bottom lines. Corporations will not move until regulators and governments force them to, or until business as usual is too costly because of climate breakdown. Last month, I was in Brussels, which is home to an estimated 25,000 lobbyists. And I met up with a group of them who go by titles such as Public Affairs Executive, Government Relations Director, or Corporate Affairs Manager. And they told me that their role wasn't to influence policymakers, but to merely educate them. When I pressed them on their outsized responsibility, they countered and told me that they were the ones who had been victimized, made out to seem like the bad guys when really they're just trying to protect jobs. They even equated themselves to NGOs and activists like myself who are petitioning the government for change. I was baffled by their thought process. Because how do you compare someone who is being paid to represent the interests of shareholders to someone who is representing the planet's 8 billion stakeholders? You can't. In order to protect our future, we need healthy democracies that serve the needs of people. And to do that, we need to reform the system. There are brilliant organizations that are already leading the way, such as Represent Us, Transparency International, and the Good Lobby. And they've helped me understand that lobbying inherently is not bad, right? It encourages stakeholders to play a role in the decisions affecting our lives. And not all lobbyists are made equal. In fact, there are companies that have been consistently advocating for Paris-aligned commitments, such as Unilever and IKEA. But the issue is that the current landscape is dominated by actors with vested interests and outsized power. So to create an even playing field, we need transparency and disclosure, comprehensive registers of lobbyists, as well as the public servants who meet with them, detailed records of meetings, expenditure reports, and the policies that are being discussed. This sounds like common sense, right? And all of this information should be made available to the public, to us, to the media, and to watchdog groups. Second, we need to close this revolving door. Every country should implement an extended cooling off period between someone serving in office and then working as a corporate lobbyist. And third, we need to get dark money out of politics and reverse rulings such as Citizens United in the US, which allowed unlimited corporate spending on political campaigns. We also need stronger anti-corruption laws, independent oversights and ethics committees, as well as an effective sanctioning system when there are misconducts. As I'm sure you can tell, there is a lot of work to be done, but what it boils down to is actually pretty simple. We need solutions that put everyday people at the heart of decision-making. Alberto Alemano, who is the founder of the Good Lobby, has championed proposals such as the court-appointed lobby, which would represent the interests of citizens and be publicly funded. He's compared the concept to a court-appointed lawyer for someone who can't afford to hire their own. And this isn't dissimilar from the concept of citizens' assemblies, where a group of people are brought together to deliberate upon issues. And assemblies are an amazing way to bridge diversity of opinion, but to also tackle really thorny issues that politicians might not want to touch. A recent example comes from Ireland, where a citizens' assembly paved the way to the legalization of gay marriage and to abortion rights. On climate, public opinion is on our side. The latest research finds that 80% of people globally want their governments to take action on the climate crisis. We are the majority, and change won't come from those who benefit from the system remaining the same. It will come from those of us who are fed up with playing a rigged game. Now it's up to us to turn the tables, to lobby on behalf of the many and not just the few. And to do that, we can actually take a leaf out of the corporate lobbyist playbook. When campaigning, it's important to know who your audience is. So if you're lobbying policymakers, what do they care about? What are their voting records? Who are their constituents? You can frame your cause from multiple angles so that you're not boxed into one ideological corner. We need to build coalitions. Just as trade associations are more compelling than disparate corporations vying for attention, we need to build partnerships with NGOs, grassroots groups, professional bodies, academics, and even sympathetic businesses. Because while standing up to corporations is essential, so is finding allies on the inside. In fact, I don't think I would have been able to write this speech today without the help of a friend I made at that Brussels roundtable, a corporate lobbyist on the inside who was willing to share his own experiences and insights. And we need to be specific and strategic. Politicians are far more likely to support realistic, time-bound proposals, so break your demands into incremental wins. If you work back from the bigger picture, what are the steps that we need to get there? I'd like to share one final story with you all. When I was 8 years old, an American fossil fuel company tried to move into my hometown in Australia. They wanted to mine for something called oil shale. And they told us that this project would generate jobs, money, opportunity. But we knew from what they had done to a neighboring community down the coast that they would in fact destroy people's health and destroy the land. Now this mine, it already had the support of our local politicians. But our community decided to launch a counter-campaign. The local tax auditor put her investigative abilities to use to surface the unsavory details of this mine's operation. My sister, fresh out of film school, made a documentary about her findings. A small business owner organized a community rally, inviting speakers, including residents from nearby communities who had been affected by other mines, environmentalists, conservationists, and members of our Indigenous community in Australia. And they even recruited the support of Greenpeace. In another life, my mum and dad used to work in advertising, and so they put their marketing hats back on to create a series of ads that targeted high-level politicians. Yet none of these ads saw the light of day. They were presented in covert meetings with our local politicians, with the understanding that they would go public should the mine be approved. Ours wasn't a community of activists, but simply people knew how to look out for one another. And so after months of community lobbying, our tiny town achieved something seemingly impossible. The Queensland Premier, Anna Bligh, called a 20-year moratorium on oil shale mining, not just in our town, but the entire state of Queensland. This is one story among countless others, because communities around the world are rising up in courtrooms, in boardrooms, and in conversations that demand accountability of our governments and of corporations. Today, we inherit a legacy of people power. From the civil rights and anti-apartheid movements to the suffragettes, the Stonewall Uprising, and centuries of Indigenous resistance, we carry the actions of those who came before us, just as future generations will inherit the actions taken by people in rooms such as this one. To quote David Orr, "Hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up." When my small town stood up to $1 billion corporation, the real victory wasn't just stopping a mine. It was discovering our power. This is our moment. So allow yourself to be radicalized with the knowledge that what we're asking for isn't that radical. The right to clean air, the right to clean water, the right to have a say in decisions affecting our future, and to defend a future, not just for the few, but for the many. Thank you.